invite you to turn to Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah chapter 4. And as you're turning over there, I just want to draw to your attention, I'm going to be doing a mini teaching class beginning this Sunday at 4 p.m. There are some individuals that have already expressed interest in learning how to prepare a lesson, a message. We're talking children's ministries. If that is something that you would like to be involved in, you want to learn or maybe just brush up on teaching children in the context of junior church or some kind of kids class here at Hillview Baptist Church, then see me after the service. Send me a text. I'd love to give you the details on that. And we'd love for you to be part on that. 22 years ago, this Saturday, I told my wife in front of a preacher and about 250 people witnessing, I do. And we left Eastland Baptist Church that afternoon. I whisked her away. We hopped in her 1992 Cutlass Sierra, and we cruised away from the city out to the sticks of Jasper, Arkansas. We stayed in a quaint little cabin for about 5 or 6 days there. We canoed, we hiked, we slept, we read. It was just relaxing. And then the honeymoon was over. You know why? Because just about 4 hours into our trip back up to the Pacific Northwest, we saw flashing lights behind us. A Kansas highway patrolman caught us speeding in a low speed zone, and I got a ticket. And then as we were cruising, heading towards the Rocky Mountains, and we exited in Denver, Colorado for our night stay there, I hear this grinding sound on the front end of the car. I take it into a local Midas the next morning, and they say, your whole brakes need to be replaced. It's going to cost $1,000. Have you ever had that feeling? The honeymoon is over. That's exactly where Nehemiah is in Nehemiah chapter 4. The honeymoon was over. Now, a little review before we get into chapter 4. He had a burden. He shared that burden with the king. The king equipped him and said, you go, I'll make sure we get timber to you. You go and you can rebuild that wall. He goes and he surveys the wall. He recruits some locals to come and help him. And in chapter 3, we see a well-oiled machine in action as they are rebuilding this wall. And you find that they are making momentum in a way that is getting the enemy's attention. And that's where we come in chapter 4, when the enemy raises its ugly head. So draw your attention to Nehemiah chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. Notice what it says. And it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which is burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him. And he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So built we the wall. And all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Have you ever had circumstances discourage you? Think back to a season in your life where there were some adverse circumstances that affected you within. It could even be present tense. But I think we've all been there before. And just so we have a talking point going into the message this evening, let's open the floor up and let's think back together as far as some circumstances that have come our way that caused discouragement to set in, where you lost courage. You're asking, is it worth it? Should I back away? Should I keep going? So what has been a circumstance in your life that has caused some discouragement? Let's talk about this just for a moment. What's been a circumstance in the past? Jessica?
My Jeep keeps breaking down at the wrong moments. Like right when I feel like, wow, everything's great, everything's in my favor, boom, it breaks down, and it breaks down like that, like a really expensive thing, something that's going to take long to fix. I'll be out of a car for weeks, or it'll cost so much money, and it just boggles me down, and I'm like, do I sell it? Do I keep it? Do I keep going?
I appreciate the transparency, Jessica. So that's like a double whammy. It's inconvenient. Then the auto shop bills start coming in too. And that really adds up. Okay, appreciate sharing that. How many of you have automobile woes before? I can empathize with you, sister. That's how the honeymoon was over for us, right? Some automobile woes. Okay, so how about you? What have been some circumstances that have come your way that have been discouraging, that have kind of taken the wind out of your sails? Ruby? Yes. Yeah. And I remember you sharing that with me, and I cringed when I heard it, Ruby. So when your foot goes through the deck, that's not a good thing. That's not a good day. So appreciate you sharing that. Others? Something that happened that led to some discouragement. Brother Mike?
Thank God it's been a while. When I was younger, getting a shut-off.
Utility company gives you the shut-off notice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that'll take the wind right out of you. Others? Anybody else? Circumstances that came your way that you're like, man, this kind of led to some discouragement. Brother Tom?
My wife spent a month in the hospital, and we got her out, and things went well for almost a year, and she passed away. And we recovered from that, and my house flooded.
I appreciate you sharing that. And then just the major transition you've been through recently, Brother Tom. There's been a lot that's happened. By the way, those of you who just shared that, I appreciate your faithfulness through this. You're sticking with it. You're continuing. You're here tonight. That's a big deal. All of us have been through discouraging situations, haven't we? That's part of the human experience, is to face discouragement at times. The question that I want to wrestle with this evening: what is the response to external opposition? Circumstances that seem to be against you. Now, I want to look at how discouragement was setting in for the people of Israel, led by Nehemiah, and then we're going to look at the response. Now, I'm going to make a strong disclaimer up front. If you're looking for this deep, original nugget tonight that you've never heard before, you might be a little disappointed. I want to remind you of some things. I want to keep some truths before you that hopefully would breathe some fresh wind in your sails to help you keep on keeping on, regardless of your circumstance, regardless of what you might be going through. Or maybe you're looking at discouragement in the rearview mirror, like you're past it now. There's probably another season of opposition coming. So when we look at Nehemiah chapter 4, here's the opposition that is setting in. There are two governors that can't stand what is going on. Their names are, one, Sanballat, and he is up in Samaria. Based on where he is from, the Horonite, that is actually a town in Moab. He was probably Moabite, but now he's leading up in Samaria, north of Jerusalem. And then you have another man named Tobiah, who is actually the governor over Moab on the east side of the Jordan River. And so it's basically you got somebody to the north who's opposing you. You have somebody to the east that is opposing you. It's not looking good. Now, the problem that they faced was this. The king had given official approval for this project. To try to bring an army to stop the work would be to incite the king and his army. That's not a good idea. Sanballat and Tobiah know that. And so what they opt for is psychological warfare. They're going to intimidate them. They're going to pester them. They're going to try to take the wind out of their sails. They're going to try to flex their muscles a little bit. They're going to be like that peacock that raises its tails up to say, hey, don't mess with me. And that's how they're going to try to get at the people of God. And we're going to see that it begins to work. But Nehemiah, the leader, he responds in a threefold manner to say, no. We are not going to succumb to discouragement. We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to withstand this. And God's going to get the victory with this wall being rebuilt. So that's the first 3 verses when you have those two enemies, and they're mocking them, they're ridiculing them, they're laughing them, trying to just spread slander about them. And then we come to verse 4, and we see the first response. Prayer. Imagine that. Prayer. In fact, it doesn't even say, and I said. It immediately goes from, here's the opposition, to, hear, O God. Who's speaking? It's not Tobiah at this point. It's Nehemiah writing first person, saying, I just start praying. I start talking to God. And notice his request here. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. In other words, God, you're listening. You hear what they're saying. They're saying a fox could knock this wall over. But notice the specific requests he gives. These are what you call imprecatory prayers. Have you heard that before? Imprecatory prayers, where you're calling the judgment of God down on somebody. The psalmist was an expert at that. In fact, I think he's probably borrowing from psalms such as Psalm 69, Psalm 79, the middle part of Psalm 139. You say, what are we talking about? Look what it says. God, turn their reproach upon their own head. Here's the next one. Give them for a prey in the land of captivity. He's invoking the law of sowing and reaping. God, look what they're dishing out. Allow them to reap. And Lord, the faster the better. It goes on and says in verse 5, and cover not their iniquity. In other words, don't let them be forgiven. Let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So, Lord, turn the ridicule on them. Make them a prey, like they're the predator. Make the lion be devoured. And then hold their sin fully against them. Let them not be forgiven of that. Don't let them go free from this. I pray that judgment would come back upon them. Whoa, he's not mentioning words, is he? Now, are you asking the same question that I asked? Where does this line up with Jesus saying in Matthew chapter 5, love your enemies? Pray for them that persecute you. How does this line up with Romans chapter 12, verse 21? Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Isn't the command to us to love our enemies? Isn't that how we're supposed to navigate this? Well, I don't want to digress into some deep theology, Old Testament versus New Testament. I just want to make one simple remark. The New Testament lines up with the Old Testament in this way. When Paul knows opposition, he writes in Romans chapter 12, urging the believers to hold on to God's words, where he says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. You see, the mark of a godly believer, even in the New Testament, is someone who stands out of the way and lets God work rather than trying to seek vengeance themselves. Because you don't see Nehemiah going after them. You don't see Nehemiah trying to, I'm going to teach that person a lesson. I'm going to put him in his place. That would have been royally stupid to do something like that. That would have just made it a further divide to take action like that. Rather, he just committed it to God and said, God, you deal with it. Psalm 109, I think, captures the balance well. Where there's enemies, but we ought to turn to prayer. Listen to Psalm 109, verse 4. For my love, they are mine adversaries, but I give myself unto prayer. Did you catch that? That is so loaded. Let me read it one more time. Psalm 109, verse 4. For my love, they are my adversaries. I've tried to be kind to them, and all they do is dish out evil towards me. But I give myself unto prayer. What a mindset when it comes to opposition. You see, just like we work out and it gets a little intense, our heart rate picks up and our pulse picks up and we're breathing, we're gasping for air. That ought to be the same way with spiritual opposition. Our heart rate and our breathing rate ought to pick up towards God in prayer. We are just breathing more intensely. God, please work. God, please show yourself powerful. God, I need you to do something. My body's kicking into high gear, but I'm directing that energy towards you, Lord. I want you to work. How are you doing with prayer? You say, well, I think pretty good. I'm not in a crisis right now. Here's the challenge. If we don't have a way of prayer in the pleasant times, we're going to be playing catch up in a sense in the valley in the catastrophe. And so I want to challenge you first before we go any further. When it comes to prayer, even if you're not facing external opposition, schedule prayer. Make it part of what you do. Something I have done recently, I noticed that in my own Bible reading time, I would get so caught up in reading certain verses and scriptures that it would just crowd out my prayer time. And I'm like, oh man, I got to start getting ready for the day. And I only got like 5 minutes here. And so I thought, the only way I'm going to do this is by carving out a time where I just get my shoes on. I put on a hoodie because it's a little cool in the mornings. And I just head out walking down the lane and walk through the neighborhood and get myself out of the house and put myself in the position where I'm talking to God and I'm praying. Now, I'm just giving you an example. That might not work for you. It might look differently. It might mean you got to turn your phone into airplane mode. This is the time I'm doing it. I'm not going to be looking at my phone. I'm not going to be looking at any technology whatsoever. This is a time where I can step away from people. I'm going to close the closet door. This is a time where I seek the Lord on a daily basis. I'm going to pray. I'm going to seek the Lord. This is a high priority for me. So there's scheduled prayer times, but then there's also responsive prayer. In other words, something happens, and like I just described, it's just rather than breathing heavily in a workout, we're breathing heavily in opposition towards God. And we're saying, God, I pray that you would work in this situation. I need you in this. So there's a responsive prayer. But then also, there's just an ongoing prayer that even as you're driving down the road, maybe between stops if you drive for your job, or maybe as you're on your way to work, or you're just running to Walmart, you're just talking to God. You're asking Him to help. Hey, work with my kids as far as what's going on. Lord, help them make wise choices. God, I pray for this new friend that you brought into my life. I pray that you'd use me somehow to be an encouragement and influence to them. God, give me wisdom with this work situation as far as, and it's just an ongoing mindset of saying, God, I'm just breathing. I'm inhaling your word in the morning, and I'm exhaling prayers to you throughout the day. But prayer is the first response that we see in this story. Now, if you were to go down to even verse 9, he doesn't let go of prayer, even though we're going to change the focus a little bit. Look at what it says in verse 9. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God. Prayer is one of the greatest contrasts you can offer to negative circumstances. Maybe another way of saying it is, confront negative circumstances with the contrast of prayer. And that's exactly what Nehemiah is doing right here. So there's prayer, verses 4 and 5. But then here's the next step. It's not just prayer. Now, this is not going to be what you feel like doing. Nehemiah probably didn't feel like doing this, but nonetheless, this is the next step, beginning in verse 6, and then we're going to see a little bit more at the end of the chapter. Not just prayer, but working. Continue to work. Continuing to serve. continue to build in this scenario. They continue to build the wall. Look at what it says in verse 6. So built we the wall. Now, I'm thinking in a mathematical equation for a moment. The natural response is 2 plus 2 equals 4, which goes something like this. Tobiah plus Sanballat means let's just give it up. That's what you would think. Mathematical equation. 2 regional governors opposing us, mocking us. It's not worth it. Let's just stop. Not Nehemiah. His mathematical equation is opposition plus prayer. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep going. And he continued in the work. It goes on and explains that all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof. In other words, in a matter of just 3 or 4 weeks, the wall was half done. That's crazy. You know why? They worked quicker on their buildings than the Toxic Burger on the corner of 42nd and Main. Have you noticed that? That's amazing. With all the technology that Toxic Burger has, they got Toxic Burger beat. No, you talk about efficiency. They're going at it, and they're getting this job done. It goes on and says, for the people had a mind to work. Their heart was into it. They were in go mode. Nothing was going to stop them. But then when you jump down to verse 21, towards the end of the chapter, it says, so we labored together in the work. And half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Now notice this intensity. Half of them held spears from the rising of the sun. So the first break of dawn all the way to the time the sun rose at night. Now this is likely late spring, early summer, so the days are longer here. This is the northern hemisphere. This isn't down south. This is not down under. So longer days, talking 12, 14, 16 hours of nonstop work. On top of that, what we're looking at is that they were instructed to keep their servants close by to their lodge. In other words, they wouldn't go all the way home. He's saying, hey, set your accommodations close to your work spot. Just roll out your sleeping bag and work, and then get back at it. Don't worry about going back to your village each night. Just stay working right here. And then they were so intense in this work, verse 23, it says, neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that everyone put them off for washing. So every couple of days, it's like, we probably ought to take a bath. We probably ought to, like, it's getting pretty little thick around here as far as the odor. And so how about we go take a quick break, clean up, so we don't suffocate here, and then we're going to go back at it. But that's the only time they stopped. It was basically eat, sleep, work. Every third day, let's clean our clothes and let's get back at it. You talk about intense. They had a mind to work. But here we are. Here I am. Opposition stirs in me this mindset. I'm not feeling it. I'm not motivated. Why keep going? I do this, and this is what I get. I try again. I get slapped again. Why try? But Paul wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3, thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. The mark of a good soldier is to keep going, not based on how you're feeling, but based on the principle and conviction in your soul. You know what that's like? Have you been there before? I've lost my feeling, I've lost my drive, I've lost my motivation, but I'm convinced this is the right thing to keep doing, and I'm going to stick with it and keep moving forward. Endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. So there's working going on here. 2018, Brother Kevin was doing a little work on the little double-wide prefab building that we had on this corner of the property. I had done my due diligence. I had gone down to the city and said, hey, is it a problem if we were to just move this over here during construction? It's a temporary setup while the building is being built, and then we'll move it off the property. They say, as long as it's moved off to get occupancy, we're okay with that. I'm like, okay, we're on the same page. I'm out making visits, and the phone rings, and it's Kevin. And Kevin says, there's a city official that just came by and put a stop work order on getting this double-wide building up and running. I'm like, are you serious? I was just at the office last week talking to them, and they told me it was okay. I'd done my due diligence. And I'm boiling on the inside like, we did our part. We're not trying to sweep this under the rug whatsoever. And so I'm immediately calling up the specific inspector who had driven by, and I'm saying, hey, I showed up, and I actually had notes as far as when I made that phone call and the time I'd made that phone call, and said, hey, I talked to you or talked to one of your associates here. This is what they said. And they said, well, you still need to pull a permit for this. Okay. All right, this is news to me. I thought I did my due diligence. They're changing the goalposts a little bit here, but we're going to navigate it accordingly. And so it was such an unconventional setup, they had no official protocol for it. That was the problem. There's nothing in the city code about a temporary building in our exact context. It's only there for a short amount of time, and then we're going to take it away. And so they're kind of scrambling, but they come with this decision, hey, you need to pull a permit. We scrambled a little bit. We stopped the work until we pulled the permit, jumped through the hoops that they required, and we moved forward. But then it was cruising for a while, and then it was the next year, the early spring of 2019. And it's time for all hands to be on deck. And I thank God for Brother Nathan, because Brother Nathan, his scope was the landscaping to get all these plants in the ground. We're talking over $20,000 worth of plants. That's a lot. We couldn't afford to pay some landscaper to do it. It's all volunteer labor. And some of you men remember, some of you ladies remember, like it was just consecutive Saturdays. Let's go at it again this Saturday. Let's go at it again next Saturday. And we were out there in cold and wet. We were out there later on in a little bit of the heat. And we just had, a mind to work. We got to get in this building. And there was some sweat. Blood was minimal, thank God for that. But there was some labor that went into it. People had a mind to work. And those of you who recall that very intense season of just having a lot of consecutive work days and trying to strategically give a Saturday off here and a Saturday off there so we're not taking all of people's weekends. It was a very intense season, very busy to try to get into this building. But that's where Nehemiah was. He had a mind to work, and he was leading the people in that. Now, we're not in a building project tonight. I thank God for that. But what we are in is the middle of serving God week in and week out. And so let me talk to you teachers for a moment. Have a mind to work on that lesson. And get a jump on that lesson ahead of time so that it doesn't sneak up on you on Saturday night. And you're ready to deliver that message to those kids on Sunday morning. When it comes to hosting somebody, when God nudges your heart to open up your home and try to be a blessing to them, respond to the prodding of the Holy Spirit and say, I want to be a blessing to this family that God has laid on my heart. I want to have them into my home, or I want to go out and buy them lunch. When there's someone who's been missing and God lays it on your heart and it feels like, man, I got so much going on, but you feel like I need to reach out to that individual to see how they're doing. I need to call them. More than just a text message, I need to get on the phone and really see how this brother or this sister is doing. I just haven't seen them in a little while. They seem off a little bit. Then follow that and keep your mind in the work of the ministry. When it comes to on a Sunday morning where you're just exhausted and you're beat up and you're like, man, all I can do, it seems, is to drag my body to church to show up on Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday night. By the grace of God, you say, God, give me the grace to still have a smile on my face and stay engaged in the work of the ministry, and help me to bless someone else, as weary as it is worn down as I might be tonight. It could be you seem like it's all maxed out, but God still tugs on your heart. Hey, why not take this young believer under wing and still work with them and disciple them? And you just feel this conviction, like I want to be used of God in ways that I didn't see possible maybe in years gone by or months gone by, but nonetheless, God has laid this on my heart. It all goes back to having a mind to work. And that's exactly where the people of God were. There's prayer, there's working, and then thirdly, verse 7, there's watching. Now, this is an interesting one. It's a little bit more complex than just the straightforward aspect of prayer. Let's call out to God. And then working. Let's just keep our hand to the plow. This is a little bit more strategy. And look at what it says in verse 7. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were wroth and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them, and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Now, do you hear what's going on in these few verses? The psychological warfare is continuing. And the problem that is presented to the people of God is they kept listening to the mockery, the slander, the discouraging talk, to the point in verse 12 where they are mimicking. He quotes the enemies right here. It was so instilled in Nehemiah's mind and the people's minds what they were saying, they kept replaying it over and over and over and over and over in their mind. This is what they said. There's going to be conspiracy. They're going to attack us. It's all over. Oh, remember what Tobiah said? A fox can knock up against this wall and it's going to be destroyed. And they're just replaying all these thoughts over their head. And of course we have in verse 12, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. You're going to be scattered. It's not going to work. And they're replaying this over and over and over. Part of the watch in opposition is to make sure that we're doing more talking to ourselves than listening to ourselves. Do you ever get caught up in the head listening to yourself and listening to what somebody else said over and over and over, rather than speaking truth to yourself? And there's this conflict going on because the people are hearing the broken record go over, all this mockery. And Nehemiah's like, hey guys, we can do this. And he's the one trying to speak truth into the situation. And what a principle to make sure that we're talking truth to ourselves more than we're listening often to our own negative emotions in a circumstance. But then he goes on and gives the strategy here in verse 13. Therefore said I in the lower places upon the wall, or behind the wall, and on the higher places I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. So he sets them up with some weapons. And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, for your sons, for your daughters, for your wives, and for your houses. So in other words, there's a cause. The relationships are at risk, and you don't know what's going to happen here. Fight for your families. Here they are exhausted. They're listening to the wrong voices. And then notice in verse 15, and it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and that God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one of us unto the work. And it came to pass from that time forth that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears and the shields and the bows and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. And they which builded on the wall, and they that bare the burdens, with those that laid it, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. So there's multiple steps he takes. One is this. Hey, I want to set some of you up with some weapons. And you're just going to be on guard. And you're going to watch for the enemy and you're going to fight him. The other half, I want you to stick with your tools. And you're going to have the tool in hand. You're going to be, spreading that mortar a little bit here. And you just make sure the work continues to move forward. You guard, you work. But it got so intense that in verse 17, it says that there were some that got into the work where they had a weapon in one hand, ready to fight for themselves, defend themselves, and they had a tool in the other. Can you just imagine? And as I look at this, I think of Charles Spurgeon's publication that he published back in the 1800s, The Sword and the Trowel, describing the Christian life. There is so much where we have to defend and watch on one hand, but we can't neglect building on the other. And we can't get so caught up in building that we neglect to watch and defend. We've got to have both tools in our hands, a weapon and a tool. And we see this right here in the book of Nehemiah. And he even gives orders as far as just in case there's an attack, there's going to be a trumpet that sounds in verse 18. And all of us run to this part, we consolidate, and we fight off the enemy with our weapons. You see, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Thank God we don't have physical enemies constantly attacking us. But we wrestle against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Do you have enemies? Do you have enemies? Let me tell you, first enemy, the person you look at in the mirror in the morning. It's called your flesh. And you got to constantly watch your flesh. For every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed, James chapter 1 verse 13 makes clear. And so, in a sense, we got to be on watch, have our weapon up with our own flesh. Hey, watch it. I got to be careful that the flesh doesn't kick in that lust, that envy, that selfishness, that slander, that bitterness that can slip in. The devil knows he can just keep his hands off and let our flesh have its way with us. But then also, I think about our own families. We got to watch out for the voices that come in. YouTube, social media, podcasts. Oh, there are some good podcasts. There are some good YouTube channels out there. There's some good social media figures worth following. I get that. But there's a whole lot more garbage. And making sure we're watching. And parents, let me just say before we go any further, when it comes to your kids, whether they're 5 years old or whether they're 15 years old, you got to be aware of what they're listening to, what's going on in their mind. Be detecting as far as that attitude's a little off. What have they been listening to here? Who have they been sitting under? And constantly monitoring that. And it's okay if your kid is 12 years old and don't have a cell phone quite yet. That's all right. Especially a smartphone. Because those voices can come in and they can do destruction, wreak havoc on your family's life if you're not careful. And they're just constantly watching as far as attitudes and impulses and where we're going as a family. We need to be watchful. And while we're serving God on one hand and moving forward on one hand, we have to be watchful on the other and make sure that through discouragement, we don't lose the weapon or the tool. Here's the point I want you to get from this. Yes, prayer and working and watching is the appropriate response that we see here. But the mindset is deeper than that. Because as I look at Nehemiah, what I see is a mindset that says opposition will inspire tenacity. Opposition, it's going to come. I expect it. It's going to inspire tenacity. I'm going to count it all joy when I fall into diverse temptations. Why? Because the trial of your faith worketh patience. Let me put it in the modern vernacular. Hey, I'm going to be joyful when opposition comes. Why? Because God is going to thicken my skin. And I'm going to go further for the glory of God by His grace and with His help. Think of Bible characters who ended well. Brother Kaminsky pointed this out on Sunday night to our School of Ministry men. It got me thinking. Think of Bible characters that finished well. Talk to me for a moment. Who's a Bible character that finished well? Moses. He finished well. Yeah. He didn't even die a physical death. You know, God just kind of took him on the mountain. Who's another person that finished well in the Bible? Who? Who's another Bible character that finished well in the Bible? Samson, yeah. He turned back. Not ideal, but he turned back. Okay, I'll give it to you, sister. Yeah, Samson, he finished better than in the middle of his ministry. Okay, he came back. Others? Who finished well? Job finished well. Man, I'm telling you, that's classic right there. Others? Who finished well? Logan? Daniel. I like that guy. I got big shoes to fill. And Daniel finished well. Now think about all these different people you just named. Which of them had it easy? Did any of them just cruise? Why do we admire them so much? Because they withstood opposition to end well. You see, the only way you're going to end well is to handle opposition well. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You will face opposition, and how you respond determines how you end. Let's go and stand, the heads bowed and eyes closed as we conclude our time this evening. I just want to pray, ask God to keep this truth before us, and then let's go out and let opposition inspire tenacity. Heavenly Father, thank you very much for your goodness to us. Thank you for Nehemiah's example. And I pray that when opposition comes and the going gets tough, that we would let the tenacity kick in by your grace, and we would pray, we would watch, and we would work. Keep your people close to you. Look forward to being back again this weekend. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. God bless for being here this evening.